The wail of sirens filled our quiet suburban street. As I stood there, completely stunned, water dripping from my hands after I just shut off my own water main. Across my perfectly manicured lawn stood Karen Williams, her face contorted with rage, gesturing wildly at me while speaking to two uniformed police officers who had just arrived on the scene. "That's him. That's the one tampering with community property," she shouted, her voice carrying across the entire cul-de-sac. I couldn't believe what was happening. All I'd done was turn off my own water to stop a major leak, and now the president of our HOA was trying to have me arrested. The stunned expressions of my neighbors peeking through their blinds told me this wasn't normal, even for our strict neighborhood. I'd moved into Sunrest Estates just 3 months ago, attracted by the well-maintained properties and quiet atmosphere. What the realtor had conveniently downplayed was the iron grip of the Homeowners Association. Led by Karen Williams, a woman in her 50s with a perfectly styled blonde bob and an ever-present clipboard. Within my first week, I'd received my first violation notice for leaving my trash can visible from the street 2 hours longer than permitted. The notice came with a $50 fine and was signed with a flourishing signature, Karen Williams, HOA president. Over the following weeks, the notices continued. My grass was half an inch too tall. My mailbox needed repainting. The color of my garden hose was not in alignment with community aesthetic standards. Each violation came with increasing fines and increasingly condescending notes. I tried to fly under the radar, fixing each issue promptly and avoiding confrontation. My neighbors warned me in hushed tones about Karen's reign of terror, how she'd measure grass with a ruler, photograph cars parked in driveways for more than 48 hours, and conduct surprise inspections of backyards when homeowners were at work. Most people just paid the fines and complied with her demands. It seemed easier than fighting against the complex bylaws she wielded like a weapon. But everything changed yesterday when I discovered a significant water leak under my kitchen sink that had begun spreading to my hardwood floors. After shutting off the water under the sink, I called several plumbers, but being a Sunday afternoon, the earliest anyone could come was the next morning. The leak was worsening and water was beginning to seep through to my basement. I needed to shut off the main water valve to my house immediately. I grabbed my toolbox and headed outside to the water main access point near the edge of my front yard. I had just managed to locate and turn the valve when I heard the sharp click of heels on pavement rapidly approaching. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" Karen's voice cut through the peaceful afternoon like a knife. She was striding across my lawn with purpose, her face flushed with what seemed like excitement at catching another violation in progress. I straightened up, my hands still wet, and explained calmly about the leak and the need to shut off my water until a plumber could arrive. Karen's eyes narrowed as she pulled out her phone and began recording me. "This is a restricted utility access zone. Homeowners are not permitted to tamper with community infrastructure without proper authorization and supervision by the HOA committee," she stated with rehearsed authority. I tried to reason with her, explaining that this was my own water shutoff, affecting only my house, and that I was preventing water damage. "It's literally what these valves are designed for," I added, trying to keep my voice level. Despite my growing frustration, Karen wasn't listening. She was already typing furiously on her phone with one hand while continuing to record me with the other. "I'm documenting this violation. Section 7, paragraph 4 of the Sunrest Estates bylaws clearly states that all utility access points, even those servicing individual homes, fall under HOA jurisdiction," she declared with smug satisfaction. When I asked to see this specific bylaw, Karen's face flushed deeper. "I'm calling this in as a felony tampering with essential services," she announced, pressing her phone to her ear. I thought she was bluffing, calling the HOA emergency line or something similar. To my absolute shock, I heard her clearly state, "Yes, I need to report a crime in progress. This is Karen Williams, president of the Sunrest Estates, HOA. I have a resident vandalizing community property and tampering with water infrastructure. Please send officers immediately." He could cut off water to the entire neighborhood. I stood there in disbelief as Karen continued embellishing her story to the 911 dispatcher, describing me as agitated, possibly intoxicated, and destroying property with tools. When she claimed I had threatened her, I finally spoke up loudly enough for the dispatcher to hear. "That is absolutely false. I'm standing on my own property, fixing my own water leak." Karen turned away, lowering her voice and walking several steps from me. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers pulled up with their lights flashing, turning our quiet Sunday afternoon into a spectacle for the entire neighborhood. The officers approached cautiously, clearly responding to what they'd been told was a potentially volatile situation. Karen immediately rushed toward them, pointing at me dramatically. "That's him. He's tampering with our water system and threatened me when I tried to stop him." One officer approached me while his partner spoke with Karen. I set my tools down slowly and explained the situation. The leak, the emergency shut off, and Karen's bizarre reaction. The officer asked for identification and proof that I lived at the address, which I provided. What happened next changed everything. The officer examining my water main looked up with a puzzled expression. "Sir, this is clearly a single residence shut-off valve. It only affects your home." He turned to his partner, who was still listening to Karen's increasingly animated descriptions of my criminal behavior. The second officer excused himself and came over to inspect the water main himself. "Ma'am," he called to Karen, "could you come over here, please?" Karen approached with confident steps, clipboard still in hand. "Ma'am, do you understand what this valve controls?" the officer asked. Karen lifted her chin. "Of course I do. It's part of our community water system." The officer shook his head. "No, ma'am. This is a single home shut-off. It only affects this residence. Did you tell our dispatcher this person was tampering with the neighborhood's water supply?" Karen's expression faltered for just a moment before she recovered. "Well, all utilities fall under HOA jurisdiction regardless. He needs prior written approval for any access." The officer asked to see the specific bylaw stating this requirement. While Karen fumbled through her clipboard and phone, the first officer pulled me aside. "Sir, you're well within your rights to shut off your own water in an emergency. There's no issue here on your end." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived as Karen's voice rose in pitch and volume behind us. She was now insisting that the officers remove me from the property for violating multiple HOA regulations. The second officer's patience was visibly wearing thin as he interrupted her tirade. "Mom, we don't enforce HOA rules. That's a civil matter. What concerns us is that you appear to have made a false report to emergency services." Karen's face went from flush to pale in an instant. "I most certainly did not. I reported a crime in progress." The officer looked down at his notes. "You reported someone threatening you and vandalizing community property, potentially cutting water to multiple homes. None of that is true based on what we've observed." Karen's voice rose even higher as she insisted she felt threatened by my aggressive tool wielding and that the HOA bylaws gave her authority to determine what constituted community property. The officers exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret before the second officer said firmly, "Ma'am, I need you to lower your voice and calm down. Making false reports to emergency services is a serious offense. It diverts resources from genuine emergencies." Karen seemed unable to process that she was the one now in trouble. She pointed her finger at the officer's chest and said with shocking entitlement, "Do you know who I am? I want your badge number immediately. I'll be calling your supervisor about this completely unprofessional treatment." That's when everything truly fell apart for Karen. The officer stepped back and said, "Ma'am, I'm citing you for filing a false police report, and I need to see your ID." Karen refused, turning to walk away, while saying she was late for an important meeting. When the officer stepped in front of her stating she wasn't free to leave, Karen attempted to push past him. Within seconds, both officers had Karen by the arms, explaining she was now also resisting an officer and obstructing justice. The look of absolute shock on her face as the handcuffs clicked into place was something I'll never forget. "This is outrageous. I'm the victim here," Karen shrieked as they led her toward the patrol car. By now, nearly every neighbor was outside watching the spectacle unfold. Mrs. Chan from across the street actually started slow clapping, which quickly spread to several other neighbors. Someone even shouted, "Finally!" As Karen was placed in the back of the police cruiser, still protesting loudly through the window. The officer who had first spoken with me returned to explain that Karen would be facing charges for filing a false police report, misuse of emergency services, and resisting arrest. 2 weeks later, I received an official letter from the Sunrest Estates HOA board. They formally apologized for the unfortunate incident and informed me that Karen had been removed from her position as board president following an emergency meeting. The letter also mentioned that she had been fined $1,000 for the false report, sentenced to 40 hours of community service, and given 6 months of probation. Karen's legal troubles had apparently also impacted her professional life. She'd been an executive assistant at a local law firm, which placed her on unpaid leave pending the outcome of her case. The last I heard, as she was being escorted from the final court, hearing she was shouting that she would appeal and sue everyone involved. The look of utter disbelief on her face as she realized her reign of terror had come to an end was priceless.